The cocktail dress was supposed to be a peace offering from her twin sister, but the hidden cameras in the restaurant proved it was an execution. They expected the fat sister to cry when the prank was revealed. Instead, the head of the Boston Mafia sat at her table, pulled out a gun, and asked who wanted to die first. Nora Gallagher knew the cardinal rules of being Chloe's twin. Chloe was the sun, blinding, golden, and demanding of all attention, while Nora was the earth, solid, round, and usually stepped on. Living in the shadow of a Boston socialite meant Nora spent her days buried in code, network architecture, and forensic accounting for a middling tech firm in Cambridge, while Chloe spent her nights draining their late father's trust fund. Nora was comfortable in her plus-sized body, preferring the quiet sanctuary of her servers and firewall protocols over the exhausting performance of high society. But tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was a peace offering. Chloe had shown up at Nora's modest apartment the day before with a midnight blue wrap dress that, surprisingly, fit Nora's curves perfectly. Chloe claimed she felt terrible about missing Nora's 25th birthday and wanted to make it up to her by setting her up with a wealthy, charming venture capitalist. Nora, exhausted from an 80-hour work week and perhaps a little susceptible to her sister's rare display of affection, let her guard down. She put on the dress, applied a layer of deep red lipstick, and took a cab to the Azure Room, an absurdly expensive restaurant overlooking Boston Harbor. The maitre d' looked her up and down with barely concealed disdain before leading her to a booth in the center of the room. A prime viewing spot, illuminated by a modern chandelier that left her feeling entirely exposed. That should have been Nora's first clue. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Nora sipped her water, feeling the familiar prickle of anxiety creeping up the back of her neck. She glanced around the bustling, affluent dining room and froze. 3 tables away, partially hidden by a decorative fern, sat Chloe. Next to Chloe was her sycophantic best friend, holding up a smartphone, its camera lens pointed directly at Nora's table. The realization hit Nora like a physical blow to the chest. There was no venture capitalist. There was no apology. This was a setup, a viral video in the making for Chloe's cruel inner circle. The chubby, gullible twin waiting for Prince Charming, only to be publicly humiliated by whatever terrible punchline Chloe had arranged. Nora's face burned with sudden heat, but beneath the immediate shame, a cold, hard anger began to calcify in her veins. She wasn't the weak, weeping girl Chloe always assumed she was. Nora survived by being smarter than everyone else in the room. Just as Nora grabbed her purse, prepared to march over and smash her sister's phone, a man slid into the velvet booth across from her. He was definitely not the frat boy prankster Chloe had likely hired. This man radiated a lethal, terrifying stillness that sucked the air out of their immediate vicinity. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that stretched across broad, heavily muscled shoulders. His face was a study in hard angles and violent history, complete with a faded, jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow and disappearing into his dark hair. His eyes, a cold, piercing slate gray, locked onto hers with the intensity of a predator zeroing in on a singular target. Nora recognized him instantly. Not from the society pages, but from the encrypted dark web dossiers she analyzed when she was bored on Sunday afternoons. Arthur D'Amico, the enforcer and rumored acting boss of the Moretti Syndicate, the man who had single-handedly and violently dismantled the Irish mob in South Boston 2 years prior. "What are you drinking?" Arthur asked. His voice was a low, gravelly rasp that seemed to bypass her ears and vibrate directly through the heavy mahogany table into her chest. Nora's knuckles turned white on her clutch. "Whatever poison they serve here," she replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. She refused to let him see her tremble, even if her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Arthur signaled a waiter with a barely perceptible flick of his wrist. The waiter, trembling visibly as he recognized the man sitting in his section, rushed over with a bottle of Macallan 25. He poured 2 glasses with shaking hands and practically sprinted away. "You are Nora Gallagher," Arthur stated. It wasn't a question. Nora frowned, her mind racing through 100 different threat assessments. "I am, though I suspect you are sitting at the wrong table, Mr. D'Amico. If you are looking for my sister, she is 3 tables behind you, currently trying to film my humiliation for the internet." Arthur did not look over his shoulder. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, his slate eyes never leaving Nora's face. He seemed to catalogue every detail of her, the defiant tilt of her chin, the soft curve of her throat, the sharp intelligence blazing in her dark eyes. "I know exactly where your sister is," Arthur said softly. "I also know she hired a D-list actor to come over here in exactly 4 minutes, spill a drink on your dress, and loudly call you a desperate pig." Nora stopped breathing. The sheer, unadulterated cruelty of Chloe's plan washed over her, making her stomach pitch. But Arthur's calm, detached recitation of the facts anchored her. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Because the actor is currently unconscious in the alley behind the kitchen, courtesy of my men," Arthur replied, leaning forward. He invaded her space with the intoxicating scent of expensive bergamot cologne and the faint metallic tang of gunpowder. "And because your sister is a fool, she uses the Gallagher name to buy designer shoes and worthless social clout. You use it to bypass military-grade encryption." Nora's stomach plummeted to the floor. 6 months ago, she had stumbled onto a massive money-laundering network, hidden within a dummy corporation's servers. She had dismantled the firewall, traced the shell companies to a private bank in the Cayman Islands, and left a cheeky line of code mocking their sloppy security architecture before patching it all back up. It was an intellectual exercise, a puzzle to solve while she ate cold pizza on a Friday night. "That was your money," Nora whispered, the blood draining from her face. Arthur smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful expression that did not reach his cold eyes. $300 million of syndicate money, exposed by a woman sitting in a Cambridge apartment. My security team spent a month trying to figure out if we were being targeted by the FBI or a rival cartel. It took me 6 entire months to track the ghost IP address back to you. Nora swallowed hard, her throat clicking in the quiet space between them. "So you are here to kill me, and my sister just gave you the perfect public distraction." Arthur let out a low, dark chuckle that sent a shiver straight down Nora's spine. "Kill you? Nora. You are the most brilliant creature I have ever encountered. I am not going to kill you. I am going to keep you." Nora stared at the ruthless Mafia boss sitting across from her, trying to process the sheer audacity of his words. The threat in the air was thick and heavy, but it wasn't the threat of death. It was the threat of total possession. "Keep me," she echoed, finally finding her voice. She squared her shoulders, refusing to shrink under his heavy gaze. "I am not a stray cat, Mr. D'Amico, and I do not work for criminals." "You do now," Arthur said, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or debate. "You possess a mind that can dismantle amours and build them back up in the dark. You are wasted balancing books for a startup that doesn't appreciate your genius. But before we discuss your new employment terms, We have a pest control issue to handle." Arthur finally shifted his gaze away from her. He didn't turn his head entirely, just angled his broad shoulders so he was slightly facing the rest of the dining room. He raised a single, commanding finger. From the shadows of the restaurant's entrance, 4 men in dark, tailored suits stepped forward. They moved with a terrifying predatory synchronization, completely ignoring the maitre d's frantic protests. The atmosphere in the azure room instantly plunged to sub-zero. The gentle clinking of expensive silverware and the polite murmurs of Boston's elite died out as the patrons registered the heavy, violent presence of the Moretti Syndicate foot soldiers entering their sanctuary. Arthur stood up. He towered over the table, a dark monolith of raw power and intimidation. He extended a large, calloused hand toward Nora. "Stand up, Nora," he commanded softly. Nora hesitated for a fraction of a second before placing her hand in his. His grip was warm, firm, and surprisingly gentle as he helped her out of the booth. He didn't let go. Instead, he wrapped his large hand securely around hers and pulled her close to his side. The sheer size of him, the solid wall of muscle pressing against her arm, made her feel something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Completely and utterly protected. Arthur led her toward Chloe's table. Chloe's smug, anticipating smile had completely vanished, replaced by an ashen mask of pure terror. Her sycophantic friend had dropped the phone in her haste to back away, and the device now sat on the pristine white tablecloth, still recording. "Mr. D'Amico," Chloe stammered, her voice high, reedy, and shaking violently. "There must be some mistake. I am Chloe Gallagher. This is my sister. She's nobody. You don't want to be bothered with her." Arthur stopped in front of their table. The silence in the restaurant was absolute. Even the breathing of the wealthy patrons seemed to have paused in collective fear. "I know exactly who you are," Arthur said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent, cavernous room. "You are the parasite who thought it would be amusing to humiliate the only valuable member of your bloodline." Chloe shrunk back into the booth, her eyes darting frantically toward the exits, which were now seamlessly blocked by Arthur's men. It was a joke, a prank between sisters." Arthur reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. The collective flinch of the surrounding diners was palpable, anticipating a firearm. Instead of a weapon, Arthur pulled out a sleek black smartphone. He tossed it onto the table in front of Chloe. It landed with a sharp clack that echoed in the quiet room. On the screen was a live, refreshing feed of Chloe's personal bank accounts. "A joke," Arthur mused, tilting his head slightly. "I appreciate a good joke. Here is mine. In the last 30 seconds, my associates have drained your personal trust fund, your checking accounts, and the illegal offshore account your late father set up for you in Geneva. You currently have a net worth of 0. Chloe let out a choked, desperate gasp, snatching the phone with shaking hands. No, you can't do this. That is my money. That is illegal." Arthur let out a harsh, barking laugh that held no humor. "Illegal? How quaint." He leaned over the table, bracing both of his massive hands on the edge, effectively trapping Chloe in the booth. His grey eyes were entirely devoid of mercy. "You set a trap for a woman who has more worth in her little finger than you possess in your entire miserable existence. You invited people to laugh at her body and her trusting nature. You wanted to make her feel small because, deep down she is a titan compared to you." Arthur stood back up and pulled Nora against his side again, his arm wrapping firmly around her waist. His possessive touch sent a shockwave of heat through Nora's body, overriding her initial shock. "Nora Gallagher belongs to the Moretti Syndicate now," Arthur announced, his voice ringing out like a death knell in the quiet room. He swept his cold, challenging gaze across the surrounding tables, daring any of the city's elite to meet his eyes. If anyone speaks a word against her, looks at her with disrespect, or attempts to make her the punchline of a joke ever again, I will personally ensure they never draw breath in this city. He looked back down at Chloe, who was now openly weeping, her expensive mascara running in dark tracks down her pale cheeks. "Consider your empty bank accounts a tax for my patience," Arthur told her, his tone flat and dismissive. "Leave Boston by tomorrow morning. If I see your face in this city again, I won't just take your money." Arthur turned away, pulling Nora with him. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, wealthy socialites and powerful businessmen pressing themselves against the walls to avoid brushing against the Mafia boss. Nora walked beside him, her mind spinning wildly. The humiliation she had feared only 20 minutes ago was completely gone, replaced by a surreal, terrifying new reality. She had just been claimed by the most dangerous man in Massachusetts. As they stepped out of the freezing air conditioning of the restaurant and into the warm, muggy Boston night, a black armored SUV pulled up immediately to the curb. One of Arthur's men opened the rear door and stood at attention. Nora stopped on the sidewalk. She pulled her hand from his grasp, though it took a monumental amount of effort to break his hold. "You ruined my sister's life," she said, looking up into his scarred, impassive face. Arthur stepped closer, effectively boxing her in against the solid side of the armored SUV. He reached out, his rough thumb brushing lightly against her cheekbone. It was a stark, jarring contrast to the immense violence he had just displayed inside. "I protected what is mine. She was a cancer in your life, Nora. I simply excised it." "I am not yours," she repeated, though her voice lacked its usual conviction, betraying the sudden, traitorous flutter in her stomach. Arthur's gaze dropped to her lips, his expression darkening with a primal, obsessive hunger that made Nora's breath hitch in her throat. "Not yet," he murmured, leaning in until his lips brushed the shell of her ear. "But you will be. Now get in the car, Tesoro. We have a firewall to build and a city to conquer." The black armored SUV bypassed the glittering skyline of Boston entirely, heading deep into the heavily wooded, affluent suburbs of Weston. Nora sat stiffly against the plush leather seats, her mind racing faster than the vehicle's engine. Arthur D'Amico sat beside her, a silent, immovable mountain of tailored wool and restrained violence. He did not speak during the 40-minute drive, but his physical presence was a constant, heavy gravity that tethered her to this terrifying new reality. They pulled through a set of massive wrought-iron gates, flanked by stone pillars and highly visible security cameras, before winding up a long, tree-lined driveway. The Moretti estate was a sprawling, modern fortress disguised as a mid-century architectural marvel, entirely composed of dark stone, bulletproof glass, and sharp, imposing angles. Arthur escorted her inside, leading her past armed men, who respectfully lowered their eyes the moment their boss walked past. They descended into the basement, which was less of a cellar and more of a subterranean command center. The air down here was cool, strictly climate-controlled, and filled with the low, continuous hum of high-end servers. Victor O'Rourke, Arthur's second-in-command, was waiting for them. Victor was a lean, scarred man, with sharp features and a perpetually suspicious glare. He looked Nora up and down, his eyes lingering critically on her curves and her rumpled midnight blue dress, clearly unimpressed by the woman who was supposedly going to revolutionize their security. Arthur did not miss the look. The air in the room instantly dropped 10 degrees as Arthur stepped into Victor's line of sight, completely blocking Nora from his view. "If you ever look at her with anything less than absolute respect again, Victor," Arthur said, his voice a lethal, quiet hiss, "I will remove your eyes from your skull and feed them to the guard dogs. Do we have an understanding?" Victor swallowed hard, the color draining from his face. "Crystal clear, boss." "I apologize, Miss Gallagher." Nora stepped out from behind Arthur's massive frame. She was terrified, but she was also incredibly angry, and anger had always been her sharpest weapon. She walked over to the primary workstation, a sleek setup with 4 curved monitors and a custom mechanical keyboard. "I don't need your apologies, Victor," Nora said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I need your Wi-Fi password and 3 minutes of uninterrupted silence." Arthur leaned back against the edge of a server rack, crossing his arms over his broad chest. A dark, deeply satisfied smile curved his lips as he watched her work. Nora cracked her knuckles, the familiar, comforting click anchoring her to the present moment. Her fingers flew across the keys. She bypassed their primary firewall with insulting ease, shaking her head at the sloppy back doors their previous IT contractor had left wide open. Within 2 minutes, she had isolated Victor's personal offshore accounts, routing a test transaction of $1 to a local animal shelter. She hit enter and spun the chair around to face the 2 men. "Your network architecture is a disaster," she announced. "The Conti family, your main rivals in the North End, have been siphoning data from your logistics servers for at least a month. They know your shipping routes, Victor, and they are currently staging a brute force attack on your primary Cayman's account. I just locked them out, but if I hadn't been sitting here tonight, you would be entirely bankrupt by sunrise." The silence that followed her declaration was deafening. Victor stared at the screen, his jaw practically on the floor, as he reviewed the access logs Nora had pulled up. Arthur did not look at the screens. He looked only at Nora. The predatory gleam in his grey eyes had shifted into something deeper, something intensely possessive and dark. He walked slowly across the room, stopping just inches from her chair. He reached out, his large hands gripping the armrests, trapping her in his space. "You are a queen among peasants, Nora," Arthur murmured, his gaze dropping to her mouth before rising back to her eyes. "You will have everything you require: equipment, personnel, funding. Whatever you need to build my empire an impenetrable fortress, you name it, and it is yours." For the next 3 weeks, the subterranean command center became Nora's domain. True to his word, Arthur gave her absolute authority over the Syndicate's digital infrastructure. She ripped out their old code line by line, building a sophisticated, multi-layered encryption network that functioned like a digital labyrinth. During that time, the dynamics of her world shifted radically. Arthur was a constant, brooding presence. He did not crowd her while she coded, but he watched her with a heavy-lidded fascination that made her skin prickle with heat. He ensured she was fed, ordering extravagant spreads from the finest restaurants in the city. When she absent-mindedly mentioned she felt sluggish from sitting all day, he had a state-of-the-art ergonomic setup and a personal chef brought in by the next morning. Society had always taught Nora that she needed to shrink, to diet, to take up less space to be worthy of attention. Arthur D'Amico systematically destroyed that narrative. He looked at her curves with a raw, unfiltered hunger. When she walked into a room, his attention snapped to her like a magnet, completely ignoring the sleek, conventionally beautiful women who often lingered around the Syndicate's edges. One evening, deep into the night, Nora was running a stress test on the new firewall when Arthur entered the server room carrying a plate of warm cannoli, He set it on her desk and pulled up a chair beside her. "You work too hard, Tesoro," he said quietly, his rough knuckles brushing against the soft skin of her forearm. "I have to make sure the back door is sealed," she replied, her heart fluttering at his touch. "The Conti family hasn't made a move since I locked them out of the logistics network. It makes me nervous. Quiet enemies are the deadliest." Arthur's expression darkened. "The Contis are desperate. Desperate men make mistakes. As long as you are in this house, under my guard, they cannot touch you." Nora looked at him, truly looked at the scarred, ruthless man who had flipped her life upside down. "You terrify the entire city," she whispered. "But you don't terrify me." Arthur reached up, curling his fingers into the soft hair at the nape of her neck. He pulled her gently forward until their foreheads rested against each other. "I would burn this city to the ground before I let a single flame touch you, Nora. You are my greatest asset, and my only weakness." The quiet did not last. The attack came at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, crashing through the western estate like a thunderbolt. Nora was in the command center, deep in a complex string of code, when the blaring shriek of the perimeter alarms shattered the silence. The monitors flared crimson, warning of multiple physical breaches across the estate's grounds. At the exact same second, her dedicated threat detection dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. It was a coordinated, dual-front strike. The Conti family had sent a heavily armed hit squad to assault the manor, using the physical violence as a smokescreen for a massive, sophisticated cyber attack aimed directly at the syndicate's central financial hub. The heavy steel door to the server room slammed open. Arthur strode in, carrying a customized tactical assault rifle, his face a mask of cold, terrifying fury. Victor was right behind him, blood already smearing his cheek from a grazing bullet outside. "Lock this room down," Arthur ordered Victor, his voice booming over the alarms. "Nobody gets past this door. If they breach the hallway, you hold the line." Victor nodded grimly, slamming the deadbolts and taking a defensive position behind a reinforced pillar. Arthur moved to Nora's side, his massive frame shielding her from the door. "Talk to me, Nora. What are we looking at?" "They are using a custom malware payload," Nora said, her fingers flying over the mechanical keyboard with frantic, bruising speed. "The physical attack is just a distraction. They hired a top-tier mercenary hacker group to crack the firewall while your men are busy returning fire. They are trying to drain the central accounts and erase the digital ledgers." "Can you stop them?" Arthur asked, his slate eyes scanning the security feeds of his men engaging in fierce gun battles on the lawn. Nora gritted her teeth, her mind entering that familiar, hyper-focused state where the world faded away and only the code remained. "I am not just going to stop them," she growled, feeling a dark, ruthless thrill rush through her veins. "I am going to gut them." Gunfire echoed heavily through the thick ceiling above them. The estate was a war zone. Dust drifted down from the acoustic tiles as explosives detonated somewhere on the first floor. Nora ignored the physical shaking of the room, her eyes locked on the scrolling lines of malicious code attempting to tunnel into her servers. She deployed a false directory, a honeypot designed to look exactly like the Moretti Central Ledger. As the mercenary hackers eagerly breached the fake directory, Nora slipped behind their offensive lines. She didn't just trace their IP addresses. She unleashed a dormant, aggressive worm she had designed weeks ago just for this exact scenario. "They are in the hallway!" Victor shouted over the deafening roar of automatic weapons. Heavy, suppressed gunfire erupted from the other side of the server room door. Victor returned fire through the reinforced gun ports. Arthur raised his rifle, stepping slightly away from Nora, but keeping his body angled to catch any stray bullets that might penetrate the room. Nora blocked out the noise. She was at war, too. Her worm infiltrated the Conti network, bypassing their pathetic security protocols. With a series of rapid keystrokes, she seized total administrative control of their financial servers. Arthur fired a controlled, deafening burst through the door, dropping an attacker who had managed to breach the threshold. He reloaded with terrifying, practiced efficiency. "Got them!" Nora whispered fiercely. She hit the execution command. In the span of 3 seconds, she drained every single liquid asset the Conti family possessed, routing the funds through 12 different encrypted shell companies before depositing the money directly into the Moretti accounts. Then, as a final lethal stroke, she packaged the Contis' entire ledger of illegal operations, bribes, and extortion rackets, and emailed it directly to the regional director of the FBI with an untraceable timestamp. "It's done!" Nora shouted, spinning in her chair. "The Contis are bankrupt, and the feds have their entire operation on a silver platter. Shut down their communications." Arthur barked an order into his radio, relaying the tactical shift to his men outside. With their leadership scrambling as their digital empire collapsed in real time, the Conti foot soldiers lost their nerve. The gunfire outside began to taper off into sporadic retreating shots as the surviving attackers fled the estate. The server room plunged into heavy, ringing silence, broken only by the hum of the machines and the harsh breathing of the 3 occupants. Victor lowered his weapon, staring at Nora with a look of absolute, terrified awe. "You just destroyed a 60-year-old Mafia dynasty with a keyboard. Leave us, Victor," Arthur commanded quietly. Victor didn't hesitate. He unlocked the heavy door and slipped out to assess the physical damage, leaving Nora and Arthur alone in the cool, humming room. Arthur placed his rifle on a nearby desk. His charcoal suit was ruined, covered in plaster dust, and a dark streak of blood on his left shoulder, though it didn't seem to be his. He walked toward Nora, the terrifying violence he had just displayed bleeding away into something infinitely more dangerous. He stopped in front of her chair, reaching down to grip the armrests just as he had done weeks ago. But this time, he didn't stop there. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a bruising, desperate kiss. It was a kiss that tasted of gunpowder, adrenaline, and complete possessive devotion. Nora gasped, her hands instinctively coming up to grip his broad shoulders. She didn't pull away. The fire he ignited within her burned through the last remnants of the quiet, insecure girl she used to be. She met his intensity, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer. When he finally broke the kiss, they were both breathing heavily. He rested his forehead against hers, his rough hands sliding down to frame her waist, reverently tracing the soft curve of her hips. "You are a monster in the dark, Nora Gallagher," Arthur whispered, his voice thick with pride and raw desire. "You are my perfect lethal queen, and I am never letting you go." Nora looked into the slate-grey eyes of the most dangerous man in Boston, feeling the massive weight of the underworld settling comfortably onto her shoulders. She smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression that rivaled his own. "I wouldn't let you," she replied. "Did Nora's ultimate revenge and Arthur's dark, protective obsession keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved this gritty dive into the Boston underworld and want to hear more high-stakes mafia romance stories where brilliant women claim their dark crowns, make sure to hit that like button. Share this story with your friends, leave a comment below about your favorite moment, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a thrilling update. Stay safe.